Hi everybody, I'm in my office today recording this for you for your PowerPoint presentation on early hominins. So in the course we've gotten through some of the early hominin information, such as bipedalism or why early hominins stood up. And today I want to give you some more information about these sort of pre-human upright walkers that we refer to as hominins. So I'm going to skip around. A lot of this presentation has to do with facts, so you can read those facts on your own, but I will stop and talk to you about some of the slides that aren't just fact. Okay, so let's begin. So this particular early hominin is referred to as Homo habilis, and this is the earliest species that was designated in the same genus as us, as Homo sapiens. So it was called Homo habilis because these fossils were found with tools, and habilis has to do with ability. They referred to this particular species as the handyman. So the handyman made tools. So this is Homo habilis. And Homo habilis, at the beginning of the Homo genus, lived as far back as 2.3 million years ago. Here you can see the increases in average brain size all the way up through Homo sapiens. And do you notice something about Neanderthals? They actually have a slightly larger brain size than Homo sapiens. But it doesn't mean necessarily they were smarter, because look who's around, right? Like, we're here and they're not. What it means is their brains were, they were formed a little bit differently, in that Neanderthals had a lot of brain in the back. They didn't yet have the prefrontal lobe, which is what has allowed Homo sapiens to survive, really, through changing environments. It has allowed us to live successfully in groups and cooperate together. It has a lot to do with emotion and memory, and some people would say is the part that's essential for forming relationships. So maybe that is one of the reasons why we're still around, and none of the other pre-human hominins are still with us. So you've heard about the Ice Age, right? This is also called the Pleistocene Age, and it's referred to as the Ice Age because there were fluctuating periods of cold and warm, and these periods of cold were very, very cold, up to 18 periods of cold. And during these periods of cold, some of the sea levels dropped up to 400 feet because they were taken up in ice. And over years, these ice bridges would remain and plants would grow on them. They would become migratory bridges, and animals and people could also walk over them. Right? So it actually created more, so-called land for migrating species. This is one picture of some of the glacial ice. This is in the last glacial maximum, which is one of the coldest periods that we've had most recently, and it was 18,000 years ago. These are some of the fluctuating temperatures that you can look at. When it says glaciation, that means it's cold. Interglaciation, these are the periods between the very cold periods. So this is an early Homo species. This one is a reproduction of Dmanisi. And what I want you to notice as we go through the slides is to look at these reproductions. They're very interesting to me as someone who is also interested in cultural anthropology. I would like you to think about, what do these reproductions say about the people who made them? So when we see older reproductions, do they tend to be more ape-like or more human-like? Are their features more primitive, or are they more modern? And what might that say about the people who made them? Homo erectus is another very long-lived species. In fact, they were much longer lived than Homo sapiens. We've only been around a couple of 100,000 years, and Homo erectus has lived almost 2 million years. So Homo erectus is the first species to migrate out of Africa all the way into Asia and into Europe. So they were very curious and smart species. Their toolkit is much more advanced, meaning that they made more advanced tools. They probably also knew how to make and maintain fire. So here's one of those slides where we look at facial reconstructions. Which one of these do you think is the oldest in terms of the time frame in which it was made? If you said the lower left one, you're correct. The one on the lower right is the one that was made after that one, and then the most recent one is the one in the middle, who looks very, very modern. Looks like Drake to me. I don't know. So these facial reconstructions, they say a lot about how people thought of themselves in relation to these different extinct species. The more primitive or more ape-like features, such as a very large nose and large brow ridges, and then the messy unkempt hair of the one on the bottom left, this signals to us that the people who made it, or the scientists at the time who worked with the artists who made it, really wanted to show that we were very different from Homo erectus, that we were clearly more modern and clearly more quote-unquote civilized than this group of people. Once we get to the more modern one, you can see how that's not as much of a consideration. Really what I think this modern reconstruction is trying to say is, how modern can we make this person look so that we can identify with them more while still retaining the accuracy of the bone structure and the features. I think this stuff is fascinating. So some new information about the date of the first potential control of fire has placed this first potential control of fire much earlier than before, about 1 million years ago. And if you'd like to look at more information, this is the Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. Of course, fire is very important, right? So fire provides things like warmth and light. And what does light do? Light allows you to stay up late, talk to one another, build community. It allows you to go places when the sun isn't out, where you might not have been able to go before. It allows you to cook your food, which then reduces the pathology of potential diseases or bacteria. You can use fire for hunting. Fire is a great way to scare animals into going a certain way that you want them to, and then ambush them to hunt them and kill them. And it's also a basis for technology, right? Pottery never could have been made without the fire that you need for the kiln in order to harden and make a pot, something permanent. So the importance of fire can't really be overstated. It's a very, very important invention for early humans and other hominins, depending on which date you'd like to adopt. So there are some famous Homo erectus fossils. This is another reconstruction. This one reminds me of Shrek, actually. It has no hair on it. But this one has a large nose, not large nostrils also. So you can read about some of the famous fossils. Ergaster is also considered a fossil species that is very closely related to Homo erectus. And some people argue that it actually is Homo erectus. So while some scientists believe it's a different species, some think it is actually just the same species, but in a different place, right? Homo ergaster is a Homo erectus-like species that's found in Africa. So at a certain point in our recent past, there were some fossils found that were very surprising. They were very small, and people started to refer to them in the media as the Hobbit. Now, I put this image here because it is not to argue that we've found hobbits like the hobbitses from the Lord of the Rings. They just called it the Hobbit because the media likes to sensationalize things. There are no pointy ears or hairy feet found. But what they did find was Homo floresiensis. And Homo floresiensis is part of the Homo genus. And it is a species of adult people that were only about 3 feet tall. They had small brains, and they found 10 of them, so they knew that they couldn't be, microcephalic, which means that they did not have a disease that would have kept their brains small. They were full-sized, full-grown, non-pathological humans, and they lived very, very recently. So what's so interesting about this species is that they probably evolved from Homo erectus in Indonesia, came to the island of Flores, which is also in Indonesia, and then over a period of several million years got smaller and smaller due to what we call insular dwarfism. Insular dwarfism is something that happens when there are just a few resources on a small island. And in terms of natural selection, the individuals that are happiest, healthiest, and sexiest on those islands tend to be smaller because they don't need they don't need as much resource as someone who's who needs a ton of resources, right? As someone who's much larger and needs more calories. So we either see on islands this kind of dwarfism where plants and animals and hominins in this case, which are another kind of animal, of course, we either see them get very small or we see plants and animals getting very large, right, because they have no predators and nothing to stop their growth. So we see both of those things happen over time on islands. This is some information about the first Homo floresiensis specimen, also called LB1, or number 1 from Liang Bua Cave, which is where she was found. These are some other examples of insular dwarfism, like the small Channel Islands fox, or a dwarf elephant that is extinct now, but used to live on the Greek island of Crete. Here's another interesting reconstruction. This is a female Homo neanderthalensis, otherwise known as Neanderthals or Neanderthals. So I say Neanderthals because Tal is a German word and it stands for valley. The original name of these people were from the Neanderthal, from the Neander Valley in Germany, which is where the fossils were first found. So Neanderthal tends to be accepted by most people as the sort of more accurate pronunciation. So we are not directly related to Neanderthals. In fact, they lived in Europe and probably evolved in Europe while we evolved in Africa, and we moved out of Africa starting about 120,000 years ago. But the group that probably we are descended from left Africa about 60,000 years ago. So while Neanderthals were around at the same time in Europe, by the time we emigrated there, and there is some evidence that we interbred, in fact, we are not directly related to them, like in terms of one species coming from another species. And here we have, again, 2 views of reconstructions of Neanderthal people. The one on the right is older than the one on the left. We look for evidence of culture in Neanderthals for things like burial practices or caring for ill or disabled individuals. And we do see this in Neanderthals, which makes us think that their societies were probably pretty advanced in terms of culture, although they did not survive the way that we did. There's also evidence of cannibalism, which there also is in Homo sapiens history, but they can see the bite marks, the The knife marks on these jaws, these human jaws, are the same type of knife marks as would be on a reindeer processed for its flesh.